All right. Good afternoon and welcome. This presentation addresses the experience of loss and the processing of grief for people who are living through the experience of parental alienation. I use the concepts and strategies developed by Pauline Boss for dealing with situations of ambiguous loss to provide some suggestions to parents and grandparents, other family members and friends and relatives who have felt the loss of a child caused by alienating behaviors. So today our agenda is comprised of the following things. I will do a brief introduction about myself and the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years. And then we will talk a little bit about how grief work for parents experiencing alienation dynamics is different. And then we'll talk about the therapeutic goals of ambiguous loss that have been defined by Pauline Boss. And we will focus today specifically on her second goal, which is called tempering mastery. And we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to talk about 6 things that help people learn to temper their mastery during times of chronic stress and unresolved loss. And then we're going to talk about what some barriers to doing that are. And then I'll give some final takeaway comments and suggestions. Okay, so let's start with a little introduction about me. My name is Kelley Baker. I have a doctorate degree in social, developmental, and personality psychology from the University of Texas at Austin. I am a licensed professional counselor and credentialed to provide supervision to LPC associates who are working on their hours for licensure. I do specialize in supervising people who are interested in working with high conflict divorce and understanding how to work with that population well. My background and my specialty has been in high conflict divorce, custody litigation, and specifically parental alienation. I have served as a court-appointed therapist to children, parents, and families. And I've provided individual therapy, co-parenting, counseling, family therapy, group therapy for families going through divorce and separation. I've also served in evaluative roles such as a Guardian Ad Litem, a custody evaluator, and I've also conducted parental alienation assessments. Over the last 10 years, I have focused more on providing education to mental health professionals and legal professionals, primarily because it seemed like the inability to serve these families well was caused in large part by a lack of knowledge amongst the professionals who were trying to help them. My most recent publication is a book entitled Therapeutic Interventions for Parent-Child Contact Problems, and it is the result of about 7 years of work on developing a curriculum to train mental health professionals. I have also provided expert testimony and consulting on cases in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, California, Florida, and Colorado. I testify on high conflict divorce in general, also on parent-child contact issues, and on a severe form of parent-child contact issues called parental alienation. I currently serve on the board for the Parental Alienation Study Group, and I did want to mention for you, those of you watching who are looking for resources on parental alienation, membership in PASG is free, and will also provide resources much like you receive from Families Divided on how to deal with parental alienation and the dynamics involved in that type of situation. I also want to mention briefly that PASG is having their 7th International Conference in Toronto in September. If you're interested in attending, either virtually or in person, you can get information on registration and what the conference is about, and all the presenters from this website here at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so let's start with a discussion of Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages of grief. So this is what's been known as it's kind of the most popular, I think, explanation of grief and how to go through a process of grieving that results in some sort of healthy resolution for the person experiencing it. And so, in a situation where a family might experience the death of a child, we might see the members of the family processing grief in this way. Take, for example, a case where the child is diagnosed with a terminal illness. Initially, the family may deny that the diagnosis is accurate. It's so hard for them to take that information in, and they spend time getting second opinions and searching for other explanations. Anger may be experienced as they realize that the diagnosis is correct, and feelings like, why did this happen to me or my child or my family, may occur. As they engage in discussions about treatment options, they may begin to have some hope and perhaps start sort of a pleading process with a higher power, with God, with the universe, to spare their child and to somehow offer something in exchange for that. That's a normal part of the grief process in this particular model. And then as treatment goes on, this may lead way to depression as they are engaging in discussions about treatment and whether or not it's working. In a situation where treatment's not working, becoming depressed and somewhat hopeless may set in, and eventually they may come to accept and can come to accept that the illness is not going away. So Kubler-Ross talked about this final acceptance and the processing of grief in this way as a healthy and natural kind of result that would come with some emotional peace about this situation and allow the person to move on and move forward with their life, even though they had experienced this traumatic loss. However, with situations of ambiguous loss, the loss is unresolved and ongoing, which is what makes it a very different process of grieving. So there is no closure. The alienated parent may never know when or if the child will return, or if they will ever really figure out what happened to them, which keeps the loss going on rather than having some sort of end to it. There's no identified end. While there may be the ending of a phase, such as an end to the litigation because the child ages out, there's not the end of the relationship because the child is still out there somewhere. There are no rituals for grieving a child that is still living. Rituals help us have closure and they give us permission to move on. It's very hard to do that when the child is living in the next city or living 2 blocks away or even living in another state. Having a ritual that celebrates or honors the child is difficult in this kind of situation. Parental alienation can be a very lonely experience because it's not common knowledge. Family members cannot be supportive sometimes because it's unbelievable that a child could be manipulated to reject a loving parent. And and also all of that parent's family, right? Friends either tell you that the kids are just being kids, or it's just a teenager being a teenager, or they come to believe that the parent must have done something so horrible to have caused the child to reject them. And so the experience can be a very isolated experience and can lead to more depression and guilt. The isolation can contribute to self-blame. Targeted and rejected parents often retrace their decisions and actions over the last many years, thinking maybe I should have stayed married, maybe I should have left sooner, all of the things that they think they could have or should have done different adds to their levels of depression and their shame and their guilt, which also increases the likelihood that they isolate themselves from other people and don't talk about the experience. So in severe rejection, the child is still very psychologically alive and present for the parent. There's memories they have, there are photos, there's videos. There's also the child's social media and friends that still have access to the child and let the parent know what the child's doing. But the child is physically absent, even though they may live very close to the rejected parent. In situations where the child is still required to have some parenting time, the child may be physically present in the parent's home, but psychologically absent because they choose to go in their room and shut the door and they refuse to have dinner with the family. And so while the child is still showing up, there's not the psychological and emotional connection and relationship that the parent once knew of it when they had interactions with the child. The next thing I want to talk about is just some of the ways that there is this chronic unresolved loss and how they show up in the life of an alienated parent. So when I began working with alienated parents, I realized quickly that many of the questions, situations, and issues that they brought up in therapy really had no easy answers. I believe that if I could help them find an answer, I could alleviate their pain. But as time went on, I realized that the therapeutic work was really learning to live with a situation that often had no clear-cut right or wrong answers. And if I was going to be any help as a therapist, I had to get comfortable with often not knowing the answer, which was the same emotional place and psychological accomplishment or task that the alienated parent had, to recognize that many of their questions and many of aspects of their situation could not ultimately be resolved because there was no closure, and because oftentimes the questions they were asking, which are some of the ones you see here on the screen, really were such a personal question, and that they were the only ones who could answer it. Also, because different actions have different results in different situations. One parent might be able to send a text message even when the child asks them not to, and get something positive in return once in a while, but they might not get it all the time. So when to send the text message and when not to send it was a question that really had no ultimate right or wrong answer. And these are just examples of the questions that I've been asked over the years, and that are representative of ambiguity. So Boss outlines 6 therapeutic goals. They are finding meaning, tempering mastery, reconstructing identity, normalizing ambivalence, revising attachment, and discovering hope. We're only going to talk about tempering mastery today. In my last presentation in the fall, was entitled The Psychological Work of the Alienated Parent. I went through finding meaning. And so we will look at that just briefly here. What was that? But this link at the bottom of the screen is the link for that presentation if you'd like to review it. Just briefly, though, finding meaning refers to a process of conceptualizing a situation. So, how do you explain it to yourself? How do you explain it to others? What have you learned from it? How do you make sense of it? And in situations of alienation, there's often an entire family system that's grieving. So, finding meaning may include how the whole family comes to conceptualize the loss of the child or the children and how they come to terms with that, and how they deal with that loss in future holiday experiences. It may be that each family member has their own narrative based on their own worldviews and religious beliefs. I discussed 9 actions in my previous seminar for finding meaning and 4 barriers to finding meaning. And so, once again, if you like to review that, you can look at the Families Divided YouTube videos and you'll find it there. So today we're focusing on tempering mastery. In situations of ambiguous loss and chronic stress and situations that seem to not have any final resolution, resiliency is affected by the beliefs that people had about how much control they should have over life and in their efforts to create the kind of life that they want. So this is interesting when you think about how much we admire people who go on through life with the belief that they can achieve whatever it is they want if they just set their mind to it, or if they just work hard enough, or if they have absolute faith in God, or they possess kind of this absolute sense of determination. In general, this type of person is considered very strong, confident, and psychologically healthy. However, in research on ambiguous loss situations, it shows that a person with this level of mastery is less capable of managing well than a person who has a more moderate level of mastery and can accept that even when they work really hard and do the right thing and persevere and have faith, there are still some situations in life that are not resolvable, and that as hard as we work, we may not be able to change them. And that sometimes we cannot change how other people see things or believe about things. We just don't get to have that much control over other people. And also that events don't always operate on our timeline. So if we believe dogmatically in our ability to have mastery over events, we are not prepared to maintain resilience when things don't go the way we want them to go, or don't go the way we thought they should go. Researchers have shown that a sense of mastery can decrease depression and health problems overall. But Pauline Boss found in her research and clinical work with situations of ambiguous loss that the more highly people valued being in charge and getting things their way, the more distressed they became when the situation had no ultimate closure. So these are the things that help to temper mastery. Accepting that things don't always change, decreasing self-blame, knowing when a sense of invincibility is helpful and when it's not, understanding where beliefs about mastery come from and how helpful are our original beliefs about that, doing a realistic assessment of one's competencies, and mastering one's own internal self. So we're going to talk about each of these individually. We'll start with this acceptance that things don't always change. And this is particularly difficult in situations of alienation, because in alienation, the person that is lost is well and alive. Maybe not well. We don't think that they are actually well, but they may exhibit to other people that they're doing just fine. There's the ability to believe and continue to hold hope for alienated parents that one day their child will get it, or one day they'll get far enough away from the alienating parent that they'll be able to reach out. To a certain extent, this hope is what helps an alienated parent keep moving on, and this does happen quite often. But it's also what can prevent a final sense of closure or an ability to move on in life. In some situations, an alienated parent is forced to say, this treatment, this intervention, this therapy, or this litigation is not working. And all of these things have not changed the situation of not being able to see my child. Sometimes at this point, the parent may decide to write a letter to the child, in essence, saying goodbye for now, but not saying goodbye forever. This is a good example of a helpful way of finding mastery or tempering mastery, in that it is an acknowledgement of one's inability to change what is at the moment. However, it's not necessarily so final, and it's not saying that the parent's given up all hope or belief, that at a later time, they might have the ability to do something else, something new, or have contact and reestablish a relationship with the child. The second thing that can be helpful to tempering mastery is decreasing one's self-blame. So many people believe that if they do the right thing, the world will have their back and things will turn out well for them. Some people hold the belief that if they treat people the way they want to be treated, that their goodwill will be reciprocated. I love it when this happens, and I believe that it happens quite often. I like to live my life that way, but I also know that just because I treat someone well doesn't mean they're going to reciprocate that to me. But for a person who believes that if they do the right thing, that somehow they have control, ultimate control or mastery over the outcome of things in their environment, they may also have reason that if they have a loss that does not make sense or that they do not deserve, that the result is because they've done something wrong. So a person who holds this kind of ultimate belief that the world is a fair and just place if they do the right thing, the only explanation they may have for something that doesn't go their way is that they must have done something wrong. And in this situation, that's not really very helpful in learning how to deal with this kind of ambiguous loss. So another way to look at this is that if we believe that good people have mastery over all events just by the fact of their goodness, then when they can't resolve or heal a situation, they are viewed as failing in some way. It's important to look at the extent to which you hold this type of belief. Sometimes clients will deny that they hold it and that it's operating inside of them, only to find after deeper processing that they really just can't let go of somehow blaming themselves for the fact that their child has rejected them. So in some ways, this goes against popular psychological concepts that say being healthy is taking responsibility, right? Externalizing blame, this second piece of this, or the second coping mechanism for decreasing self-blame, involves giving blame realistically to things that were out of your control. And so this kind of goes, is what I'm trying to say, is that it goes against some popular beliefs that psychological health means that you can always acknowledge what you've done wrong, you can always accept responsibility. But in parental alienation, parental alienation is characterized by an unjustified rejection of a good enough parent, and is caused by the alienating behaviors enacted by an alienating parent or a favored parent. It's often common to find a small bit of truth in what an alienating parent will say about the other parent, which makes it hard for the targeted parent to stop beating up on themselves. It's helpful to remind yourself or your client, if you're a clinician, that these complaints were not cause for rejection prior to the separation or the divorce in the family. So externalizing blame when it's realistic can be a way to minimize debilitating self-blame and guilt. Some examples of appropriate external sources of blame in alienation cases that I've seen would be the judge in my case had no knowledge of parental alienation, and I had no control over which judge was selected to hear my case. Another one might be I was ordered to leave the home because a temporary restraining order was filed against me because of false abuse allegations. Therefore, I didn't have the option to stay, which left me at a disadvantage with my children. One more example is I had no idea that parental alienation even existed. I didn't have the knowledge I needed to know how to deal with what was happening to me or how to help my children. So shifting the focus from accusing oneself of not doing a good enough job to understanding realistically their limits and the power of controlling some external factors in the situation can be helpful. So the third thing that can help temper mastery, or the third suggestion, is knowing when a sense of invincibility is helpful and when it is decreasing logical decision making. An example of too little mastery in a situation of alienation could be a parent who enters into a serious relationship quickly as a way to deal with the loss of the marriage and the loss of the child that's rejecting them. So moving in together with somebody very quickly, or even having another child very quickly as a way to fill the void, instead of trying to find a legal or therapeutic way to deal with the situation. So actually, they create new barriers for themselves that limit the child's willingness to spend time with them. I want to make something clear here as I use this example that I am absolutely not recommending that alienated parents never go on with their lives or try to have healthier relationships at some point. This example only refers to a parent who feels incapable to make any change in their situation, and so therefore gives no time and no energy into trying to create change with the situation as it is. An example of a parent who might exercise too much mastery would be one that would believe that if they could just have some contact with their child, they could convince their child that what they're doing is wrong. And so they ignore the fact that there are restrictions about how close they can be to the child or where they can be. And they show up at the child's school or at the residence and create a scary situation for the child. That would be someone who feels like they can fix it no matter what, right? And they ignore other situational factors. Another situation would be just ill-timed actions that cause problems instead of creating positive change, and interferes in the likelihood of correcting the situation. So for clinicians and those providing support to alienated parents, normalizing the parent's need for mastery, but helping them determine when more mastery or less is the best response for what they have going on at that time. All right, the fourth thing, Boss has found that understanding where your beliefs about mastery come from is an important step in learning how to temper one's sense of mastery when dealing with situations that lack resolution. So the origins of our sense of mastery come from the experiences and relationships that we've had, and from the messages we've received from our parents, our grandparents, and other influential people in our lives. The messages that we receive from our family about mastery in life play a role in how we respond to events that are going on in our life now. So for a person who grew up with the message of you can do anything, you can have whatever you want as long as you work hard enough, outcomes are related to how much effort they put into something. So this really is such a valuable lesson in life, because we do learn to expect that we need to put effort into things if we want to change things in our lives, or we want to accomplish things that may not be easy right off the bat. But in situations where there is no resolution, or where there are factors out of our control, this approach can lead to a sense of failure and feelings of guilt and shame if the person is not able to affect change. So the opposite message from family is not helpful either, that one's ability to achieve success is out of their hands, and it's more influenced maybe by the status they hold in life or the neighborhood they grew up in. This is kind of a fatalistic view of life, where the person has little faith, if any, that they have the ability to create change or influence outcomes in their life. In the situation of traumatic loss, this type of acceptance can actually be helpful at first with a situation that's unresolvable, but really is not helpful in the long run. So people can learn to survive, but their circumstances will never improve after that if they hold this type of fatalistic view. So neither of these messages are really very helpful. In comparison, a person who might grow up with a more balanced perspective, and one that we would want to help alienated parents come to, is that hard work and agency are important factors in achievement. But there may also be factors that impact your success that you had no idea existed until you got into the situation. So a more realistic assessment ultimately leads to more resilience in situations of traumatic loss, situations that have unresolved endings. So it can also be helpful to explore your models of mastery. These may also be your parents. Models refer to what did you see other people do. So how did you see the important people or influential people in your life managing challenges? Just watching them can tell you something about the origins of your beliefs. The third one is looking at interpersonal relationship dynamics. So in situations of parental alienation, this is interesting because we often find some intergenerational patterns at play, either for the alienating parent or for the alienated parent, which have to do with previous experiences of parental loss. Maybe it had to do with divorce. or maybe a parent just left. But sometimes those patterns can be playing themselves out either in the partners that we choose or the way that we manage um, a situation of separation and divorce. And so it's often interesting to look at those dynamics um, to see if what you experienced um, in terms of your parental relationships, or even that you can see go back as far as two generations, maybe grandparents had a traumatic divorce, and look at what how mastery was managed in those situations can tell you maybe how you're managing something about how you're managing it now in your own situation. So the other thing that can influence beliefs about mastery are the culture that we grow up in and the society in which we exist currently, right? In our society, men still report feeling more psychosocial resources when they experience loss than women. Uh, if you or if you're a clinician watching this, your client was in a situation where they lost all of their power in an abusive relationship, perhaps it's important to acknowledge that that's where they're coming from, right? But remaining powerless and feeling that way is not going to help them move through um, the grief process of ambiguous loss. They will need to find a sense of mastery, and it may be important that they just start with very small things. So if somebody is starting this process with a strong sense of being powerless, you might be able to find mastery just in making daily decisions for yourself, very small things, starting with how much exercise are you going to put into each day, or how often are you going to see your therapist, and making those kinds of choices about self-care can lead to more and more mastery. Okay, the fifth thing that's helpful is a realistic self-assessment. So looking at past accomplishments. When did you feel hopeless about something and still find a way forward? Uh, it's likely that you experienced some doubt in that situation, you experienced some fear, and yet you were able to find some way to move forward and move through it. So looking at these types of experiences in your past will help you find times when you were able to feel some sense of accomplishment or some sense of resolution. And those can provide increase your confidence in your ability to deal with what you're dealing with now. If you or your client is experiencing just a lack of examples, like they just can't find any examples of when they felt successful, sometimes you can ask family members to help with that process, to help remind them of times when they overcame a hardship um, or had resiliency in a really tough situation. All right, the last thing that can help when you're learning to deal with situations in which you feel like you don't have any control over external factors is to find control over your own internal state. So one way to do this is to uh, reinterpret a situation from a positive perspective. So this can affect internal emotional states. The guidance here is not meant to minimize the pain of the situation, but pain that is immobilizing and creates hopelessness and deep depression is not helpful in the healing process. If your situation is unresolvable and cannot be changed realistically, finding something positive that has come from it. Maybe it's just even that you were able to help somebody else not have the same experience. Sometimes this is referred to as finding a silver lining. This can shift your sense of mastery from being able to change or control the external environment, being able to change the litigation process, or being able to change the way that family law is managed, or being able to change how your child responds to you. Those may not be things that you feel like you have any control over. And so being able to have control over your internal state. How am I going to look at this? How am I going to view the world? Can I still find beauty in the world? Can I still find a sense of accomplishment in some of the things that I do? Can I still find moments of love in relationships for myself? These are all things that will help you deal in a healthier way with the external factors that you feel that you don't have control over. So it just becomes part of your coping repertoire. And it may be that some days you do this really well and other days you don't. It's not about perfection. It's just about one tool in your toolkit. All right. Another way that research has found that people are able to control their internal emotional states is through meditation. And meditation has been found to increase resiliency. So when people learn to control their mind and still their thoughts, they have higher levels of resiliency. The practice of meditation has been shown to increase a person's ability to manage stressful events. So in one of Pauline Boss's books, she has this great little Zen story that I thought I would share with you about this. So a man was enjoying himself on a river at dusk. He saw another boat coming down the river toward him. He yelled to tell the captain to watch out and turn aside, but the boat just continued its course toward him faster and faster. He stood up in his boat and he screamed and he shouted and he shook his fist, but the boat smashed into him nevertheless. In that moment, he saw that it was an empty boat. So the point here is that there are a lot of empty boats out there, and our need to control can cause trouble if we're rigid about how resiliency looks and about how mastery is applied. So here are some barriers for tempering mastery. Too much sense of mastery leads to expectations of perfection. Too little may lead to passivity and apathy and waiting for a miracle. Timing of not knowing when to stop or not knowing when to act can be a barrier. All-powerful beliefs that outcomes are always guaranteed if we do the right thing or if we work hard enough can interfere in mastery. And then the belief that bad things can't happen to good people can also interfere. The other thing that I've seen in a situation of alienation is that an alienated parent can become so angry and that they blame their entire support system. So even the people who have tried to help, and maybe they've been imperfect in their ability to help, get sort of put into an all bad box. Like there was nobody good that helped me. There was nobody who did anything right. And in that way, they eliminate an entire support system and isolate themselves even more. So some final comments are that helplessness is not helpful. Feeling out of control or feeling incapable of making change is really not useful. Martin Seligman was a psychologist who came up with the term learned helplessness to describe the emotional experience of not being able to create change in a painful situation, which causes a person to sometimes give up. And he saw learned helplessness as a situation where mastery was completely extinguished. So motivation for change becomes blocked by feelings of helplessness. Another thing I want to comment on is that a person's level of mastery is dependent on the way they were raised and what they've been through. And so it's important to identify where the person's starting at and then making small improvements and small changes from that point. Also, in a situation of alienation, options for mastery and control over external factors change as the process goes on. So, for example, a parent may have many more options for exerting mastery in a situation when the child is very young versus 4 years down the road, maybe the difference between a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old. Their options for mastery are much more limited just because of the child's age. And then think about the situation where the child ages out. The options for using the legal system are not there anymore. And so when you're working with a person, or if it's your own situation, your options for creating change change as time goes on, and it's important to acknowledge that. The same thing you're doing initially when the divorce occurs may not be helpful at all a year later. And so having people that can help you see that. Number 4 is just the reminder that this is a lifelong experience, that we have reunification happening all the time at different points, and sometimes very unexpectedly. And while it's always a wonderful experience, and one that we in our community that we all celebrate, there's also ongoing loss with that for a parent. And sometimes that has to do with the bittersweet experience of having contact, and as you have contact with your adult child, remembering all the years that you lost. And so dealing with ambiguous loss is ongoing. That's part of what makes it so different from a situation where you might have closure. So remember to celebrate small successes, and that way keeping hope alive. And that is the end of my presentation. I was running out of time anyway, so I was trying to decide if I could say more about that, but it's time that I end. I want to thank you. This is a picture of my new book, and it is available on Amazon and also from the publisher, who is Charles C. Thomas. This is my email address if you have any questions, and this is my website if you need any more information about my services and my practice. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.